All right. So, um, really appreciate all of you getting together and wanting to do a little training on how to do sample plans and ATMs. I always think it's a great idea to do that. And we've gotten several through all the way from the PE signing off on it to the district lab signing off on it to area engineers signing off on it and even our audit section here at headquarters signing off on it. And so that's just one other thing that you will not have to bring up here in a box. They can be turned in digitally. Our people up here know that, and so that's been pretty good. So let's kind of start off by like talking a little bit about what the differences are. And one of the main differences is that the sample plan, the way we um, have been doing it over the past several years, has been, kind of static. So you create a sample plan at the beginning of the job. The inspector usually gets a copy of that, samples through the job, and then at the end, you do your 2059, right? One thing that is a problem with that is it never gets changed. So we all know there are changes to the project, quantities get added and taken away through change orders and that kind of stuff. And so sometimes we get to the end of the project and realize that something was not sampled correctly, and we have to E&O it or that kind of stuff. And so I want you to think of this sample plan software as a little different. This is something that we like to refer to as kind of a live sample plan that can be changed throughout the whole project. And, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but building a sample plan in HeadLight software is really populating a dashboard for the inspector to sample from. And so that way you're both on the same page. When you make changes to a sample plan in this software, the inspector in the field is able to see that on their iPad through the dashboard and make adjustments and make sure they're on track to capture all the samples that need to be captured. So one of the reasons why, like, what's the whole point behind this? Why did we move towards this like live sample plan format and then doing it in HeadLight? And one of those reasons is for probably the past 5 or 6 years, we have gotten dinged by the legislative auditors. And what they do is they go in at the end of a project when everything's over and they look at what we've turned in. And then they say, okay, you didn't do this, this, this. Okay, y'all did a bad job, whatever. And so we don't pass the audit that year. And basically, they say, like, if we miss one thing on that 2059, they say, y'all didn't do the QA for this, right? And so, but that's not really true. A lot of times we are doing QA throughout the project, but we miss something, we have to like, the whole thing, but it's not like we didn't do all of it. And so, this being live, what we're trying to do is steer those auditors away from that final product that we turn in, like our final, you know, the box that you turn in the HeadLight and move, I mean, at audit here and move them towards when they're ready to audit a project, they can just audit it in real time where it's at and then see where we've captured all our stuff. And that's where the dashboard comes in to be pretty important here. You'll see it kind of down here on the left. There's a dashboard here and also in HeadLight materials, and they match except for one thing, and we'll talk about that. But point them towards that dashboard, they can see, okay, according to your sample plan here, or your dashboard says the same thing. It says you need 10 samples. You've gotten 8 samples, which, you're on track pretty much as long as you get these other 2 samples. So they can see that we're actually doing the QA work and doing what we say we're going to do throughout the project instead of waiting to the end. And so everybody kind of got behind that. I know that you all have noticed we've been pushing sample plan a lot over the past probably year. And that was because the executive staff kind of jumped in there and they wanted this to be part of that, trying to get out of that legislative audit problem. And I will say we did pass the last one, so that's good. We are on the right track and doing much better there. So we got to keep passing those audits is really the way why we moved this way. Um, so moving on, like how do you even get here? It's just sample plan at headlight.com. This first part here, sampleplan.headlight.com. We put these links on just about everything, but one thing I do is you see I have it kind of bookmarked here. We want you to use Google Chrome as the browser, that is better. That's what HeadLight kind of builds everything towards. It's kind of optimized for Google Chrome. So whenever you're working on any kind of HeadLight product, we prefer that you do it in Google Chrome. It will work in Edge. Sometimes you have good luck there, sometimes not. And so that's why we just kind of tell everybody Google Chrome and then just bookmark it. You can, when you're in here, you can just grab hit the star and it'll bookmark it for you. Makes it easy for you to get to. Um, and so then let me just start by doing layout here. I'm sorry, this is the wrong project. So this is what you're going to see when you first log in to Sample Plan. You can see my kind of profile up here. I'm logged in. There's not much there, contact support or log out. Like I said, this is a test project. And then over here, you have your left-hand navigation, which is kind of how you get to each thing that you need to see in the software. What we're starting here with, what we're looking at is you can see the sections under the nested view. What I like to actually, you kind of saw this, but I want to make sure everybody knows. So to change projects, so always make sure you're working in the same project. There's a drop down when you click in this box. I have access to all projects. That's why you see so much here. Everything's searchable, just like other HeadLight products. But this is how you would get to your project. And then the main thing to note here is that the nested view and the panel view do exactly the same thing. Why is it not switching? Okay, there we go. So they're basically the same tab with two different looks is the way to look at this. It is a preference. So you can build a sample plan in panel view and it would populate everything the same way as if you did it in nested view. What I tend to find is that the PE offices like the nested view better, at least I do. And the panel view, the labs tend to like it better. Like I said, personal preference, but I want to call out one thing that I even like more than just being in the nested view here. And of course, it's going to take, let me just warn everybody, it's going to take a lot longer to load stuff just because I'm doing a Zoom call and trying to work in HeadLight. So please bear with us. So when it first comes up, it gives it everything to you in sections. And so if I wanted to go edit something in the sample plan, I would have to do a drop down, and that just kind of lumps these line items that are like line items together. And that's good and it works pretty well, but I prefer to uncheck this. And when you do that, somebody actually has something in here already. I'll switch projects in a minute, but anyway, so what this does is it gives you everything line item by line item. So line item 1, 2, line item 3, 4, all the way down. Seems to me that everything in the PE office is going towards line item based stuff. And so I like to look at it like that when I'm going to add stuff. Let me go grab another project while I'm thinking about it. I should have wrote down the number to the one I had a while ago because it was empty. While this is loading, I do want to show you, I had this other one pulled up on purpose. So when I say empty, that means that this project that I'm trying to find here has no materials associated with it. I tend to like to build a sample plan from scratch with nothing, but I'm finding that most people don't like that. Like if you click on one of these right now, if I click on this, it's going to ask me to add a material because it doesn't have anything in it. What I'm finding is across the board, I feel like most people prefer a sample plan that has materials added already. And so this is a good example because we had a PE that requested this. HeadLight does have the ability to import all of the import all of the materials that are normally in Site Manager. And so just yesterday, they fixed this project for a PE, but they also are doing a long-term fix to where it'll pull in all the materials. So I think you'll start to see all your materials populated first. And what I mean by that is basically all the materials that are associated to this borrow show up in here already. So you only have to select them and not go find them. I can see why most people like that. It's probably better. I guess I used to not like having to go in and I would clean up my 2059 at the end, and I didn't like going to delete a bunch of stuff out. I usually like to add what I thought I was going to sample, and that was about it. But anyway, I can see where most people are going to prefer that. And so you will probably, when you go to do your sample plan, you'll probably start seeing your materials populate at the beginning. And so probably save you one step. But kind of moving back over here to the different views, like I said, nested view, panel view, they do the same thing, personal preference on which one you want to work in. Today, I'll work in the nested view just because that's what I'm used to. Sample plan checklist. So when you make edits to this sample plan, what you're doing is you're building a sample plan checklist and you're also building a dashboard. And we'll just go take a look at this. There's nothing in here right now because we've not added anything. Actually, it might not be a good idea to let this load up to go look at it, but because it's not going to show anything. Give it just a second. Yeah. So anyway, maybe we'll come back to these later. I'll show you the sample plan checklist and dashboard after we get there. Let me go ahead and grab materials tab here so I can show you that as well. And so these two pieces of software work together, sample plan. So sample plan and materials, right? And so what you do in the nested view here and build a sample plan out, it'll populate that sample plan checklist, populate the dashboard, and then in materials, now I'm showing you on the web, but on the iPad is where the inspector will actually be able to sample directly from the dashboard that you build. And so we'll, when we get there, we'll select that project and I'll show you what that looks like. Back to this project. Okay. And then documents, pretty much the only thing this is for that initial sample plan checklist. You'll actually do it here, but it'll show up here. So I don't use this very much, I'll tell you, because a lot of the times for everybody to have visibility and doing the sign-offs and stuff, that's better to do in the HeadLight Fieldbook software. Not, you build it in sample plan, but it kind of shows up as a form in Fieldbook. And so I tend to not use this very much. Tutorials is good. This is the HeadLight Academy. It is very generic. There's nothing LADOTD specific in here, but it does give you kind of what I'm talking about now, like how to navigate, where are the buttons that you need to press if you want to go do a tutorial there. So when we were kind of talking about who's supposed to do this at the beginning, we kind of came up with it's really better if you kind of work together. And so that's what I encourage. Now, we let you as a district decide what you want to do. So this is not like telling you what you have to do. But like the lab knows a lot more about the asphalt section and what's required, because you do a lot of the sampling, except for maybe the tack and, obviously grabbing the cores. But so there might be a section or something that the lab fills out and the P office does the other parts of it that they're more familiar with. Or they might be more used to what the dirt stuff is and what the contractor is going to select and that kind of thing. And so we encourage you to kind of work together. The good thing about this being cloud-based is you can kind of both work on it at the same time, as long as you're saving and making sure you're kind of refreshing that page so that you're seeing all the entries that are being made. And not that you have to do it exactly at the same time. I'm just saying that both of you can see the same thing, and so it kind of gives us you can kind of work as a team on a sample plan. So you should probably think about that as well. Maybe the sections that the lab is more familiar with, maybe take those over. So this would be like when you all that stuff I just said for 30 minutes, like now we're getting into what it takes to build a sample plan. And I like to start from scratch here because it's good for you to be able to see how to go search a material. If it's there, great, you can just add your requirements to it. But if you actually had to go search for something that wasn't there, I'll show you how to do that now. So for line item 2 here, when you select anywhere in here, this is actually the add material button. But since there's nothing in there, anywhere you click, this little dialog box will pop up and it'll tell you to add materials. And so this is a search box right here, and it searches just like everything else in HeadLight. It'll search any of these numbers or any of these words that are in here. So you can often start with whatever, if you're looking for something for borrow, it's probably going to start with 203. So you can start there and it'll filter those materials down. Anything with, you can see this has this dowel bar has a 203 in it. So it captured that one, but it also gives you everything that starts with a 203. So it makes it a little easier for you to find something. So we'll just grab a usable soil here. And you can, another thing to note here is that you can select multiple and do them all at the same time. For this one, I'm just grabbing one just to show you how to do it. And so we're going to add a material, and you can see we got a drop down here. Whenever we added a material, it added the material here on this line, but that's not complete. This is not a complete step. I will say that um, to when an inspector is creating samples in the field, the material has to be added to the line item for it to allow them to select a line item on the sample and save it. And so there's often times where they're in the field and they have to sample something quickly, right? They realize they have to grab something and they go to put the line item in and they can't because the material's not added. This takes, like you saw, it only takes a few seconds to go add a material. They actually, if you have inspectors that you want to be working in sample plan, they're actually able to do this on their iPad through a web browser. There's no app for sample plan, but through the web browser, they could go add it right quick themselves. But just know the material has to be added to a line item for that sample ID to be created. But the next step, which is when we select this, it brings up this other box over here. And this is going to give you some stuff like your bid quantity, the expected quantity, how much is installed, right? But we have to add a sample type to this. So we have a material, but we actually have to add sample requirements to that material. It's going to default to acceptance because that's what most of our samples are. If it were, concrete cylinders or something, you might want to go ahead and add your information only here. I'll just do it just so you can see what that looks like. Obviously, we're not going to do that on dirt, but I'll just show you. When you add those, you have your sample type acceptance here, and then down below that, this is your second type, which will be your information only. I'm going to delete it now that you've seen that it does it. And this will start with, I actually think some changes were made recently where it's pulling frequencies from the site manager sample plan, like the ones that we have preloaded. This is kind of how you turn it on or off, but obviously if you've put it in there, you want it on, so we're going to leave it on for now. Whenever you see a frequency of 999,999, that means one per project. That's actually wrong for borrow. Obviously, I think we were going to want that to be one per 1,000 on here. So maybe something's going on with that. I also want to note just quickly when I say that the software is not perfect and there's some problems with it, these notes that are in here at some point got overwritten, and these are not always the correct sample instructions that are listed here. So I just tell people to ignore those. You should be looking at the material sample manual to make sure you're grabbing what you're supposed to. Dirt is normally one per 1,000, and so I just kind of knew that. Conversion factor. I don't think you have to fool with this very much anymore. That is there for samples that are stuff like soil cement, where it might be sampled per cubic yard, but paid for by the square yard. To get the right number of planned samples or required samples, you would sometimes have to play with that conversion factor. Just know that this is kind of a calculator, right? So whatever your quantity is here, especially your installed quantity, if you put one per 1,000 and this quantity was 1,001, then it would show you need two samples, right? And so that's what you're trying to do, is manipulate all these numbers here according to your bid quantities and your frequencies and conversion factor. You're trying to manipulate those to where it shows the correct number of samples needed for the job according to the material sample manual. HeadLight actually had, the reason I say you probably won't have to fool with that conversion factor much anymore is because HeadLight has a neat feature here with the override. I tend to like this more than anything because when I used to do my sample plans, I would not fool with that conversion factor and stuff. I would just, if I knew I needed, let's say you have 20 zones in a project and I know I need to get 20 densities or 20 samples, whatever the case may be, I like to just put my rate as 20 and frequency as 999,999, and because I knew it needed 20 samples, and that would get me by. Well, you can't really do that anymore because you can't change the rate, but you do have the ability to override this and just put in the number of samples you want. And so I could just put in that I want to take 20 samples. I'm required to take 20 samples, and that's going to populate in the dashboard. There's some other information you can fill out here. If you want to put in different sample instructions or give a description of what needs to be done here, you can do all that here so that the inspector can see it. The one they can see the easiest is this remarks. So I like to put stuff here rather than in these boxes. Sample size and sample units. I mean, this is all good stuff. You're welcome to fill all this out, but it doesn't really show up anywhere except sample plan in this box. So not necessarily. I think these are probably being utilized more for other states and really might even be beneficial once we move into HeadLight only, because then we can make these boxes kind of populate tables and stuff in the background where it needs to go. But for now, I would just say that this stuff right here is not that important. The remarks is if you want the inspector to know something about what they're sampling. So one other little box here that shows up is error and omission. So if you have a line item or something that, something gets messed up, you didn't grab your samples, inspector forgot to sample it, or whatever happens there, and you need to do an error and omission, this is where you would put that. And you can just type an error and omission here. I'm just going to put something in there so that we can't, well, I'm not typing well today. So I'm just going to put something in here so that you can see where this shows up later. So that's under line item 2, and we're going to save it. So what we've done here is we've added a material and then added testing requirements to that material. And I actually just overrode it so that it has showing that we need 20 samples. Anyway, all right, so back to sample plan checklist. So this is what it's gonna kind of look like. It's going to give you a line item description, your basic header stuff, your bid quantity and installed quantity. So here you can see what the frequency conversion factor of that is. You know what? I think I submitted a ticket on this. This is another problem with the software. So you know how we did the override and said that we were going to require 20 samples here? So what should happen is you should get 20 samples show up here because we did the override, and 20 samples required because we did the override, and that's not populating in this sample plan checklist. So just one thing to keep in mind, it's not populating here yet. HeadLight is working on that. But this also at the end, you can see why we want this attached, because when you show minimum required and minimum taken, this is just like the, if you guys were doing Excel or whatever you were doing before, that's pretty much what we would always have, right? You want to be able to show, okay, I'm required to have one and I have one passing. And so that's kind of what this document is for, the sample plan checklist. Now, earlier, we talked about having that initial sample plan and having it signed off on. So that's what you do here, this create form button. So basically, this is just how you create that document and go through and sign it. You can do that here. You can rename it. If you're going to rename, if it's like the first one you're doing, right, the one you're actually going to sign, I do recommend renaming this to probably initial sample plan. Can't type again today. Renaming it so that it's easy to find because all of the forms that you create in HeadLight kind of show up in a list in Fieldbook. So you want it to be something that's easily identifiable. Whatever you guys choose to name it, that's up to you. As long as the PE and the district lab engineer know what the name is, I think that's really what we're going for there. And you can, we only have one thing in here. Obviously, this is normally going to be much longer. But there's a place for a PE signature and the DLE signature. This comment button here is good. If you did a review and you want to add a comment here about, hey, if this changes throughout the project, make sure we're grabbing it. Whatever, you have the ability. I've not seen anybody use that yet, but just know that it's there. One thing I usually tell people when it comes to the sample plan checklist and when it comes to the ATM 2059 is, instead of like if the PE had just built a sample plan and sent this in and it was already signed, right? And then Blaine goes in and looks at it and sees some changes And so she's like, well, I can't sign this until these changes are made. You basically have to go do a whole new form at that point because and kind of reject it. And that's okay. You can leave it rejected in the project. There's no problem with that. As long as you have one that's final, that's done and signed and approved, that's great. But what I usually tell people is before the PE submits it, like I said, this is cloud-based. So the PE can just contact the DLE and say, hey, look, go take a look at this. I've got it pretty much where I think it needs to be. Go see if you see any changes. And so you can do that all in the software prior to creating the document. And that will probably save you a step if you do that review in the software instead of doing it here and then being ready to sign it. When you go to sign this, so you'll hit, so whoever creates it can create it and submit it. And that's going to put it in a submitted status here. And so that means it's ready for the project engineer to sign. So the next action here is to approve. So now you can see that it's in a pending DLE status. It put my name in here. Whoever's logged in is the name that's going to go here. So that's another thing to remember. But even me, like showing the PE, it's going to give me another opportunity to approve. Now, here, you kind of have to go click another action button to get that to show up to approve. It looks a little different in HeadLight. When you approve in HeadLight, I'm sorry, in Fieldbook, it's kind of like approving a report in Fieldbook. It pulls up the same report card like you're doing a daily work report. And when you hit approve, another approve a button, it will pop up, even though the PE just hit it. And so it looks like you need to go hit that button again, but you don't. It actually is sitting there waiting on the DLE because it's in the same situation. But all right, so now that we've got a form here, I wonder if it'll let me actually sign this. I'm gonna go ahead and sign this. And you can see now it's at an approved status. Close that out here. And so hopefully that'll, when we run a 2059 in a little while, we'll see that on there. You can also see here that my errors and omissions are showing the test like we typed in earlier. So that's just the basics of what the sample plan checklist is going to look like. Now let's move on to the dashboard. So onto the dashboard. So again, all the work you do in the nested view or panel view populates sample plan checklist and it populates the dashboard. And so this is a dashboard entry. You can see right away, this is really beneficial to the inspectors. And we feel like that the dashboard is really the most beneficial thing we get out of sample plan. We will acknowledge that doing a sample plan in HeadLight takes a little bit longer. One, because you're just not used to it, but even those that have kind of gotten used to it, they find that it does take a little bit longer to do a sample plan in here compared to what we've done in the past. But where we feel like the time saving comes is when from the dashboard and the inspector being able to sample from that dashboard in the field. And so you can see here, there's 4 tabs, there's 4 different ones. Just looking at the basic sample plan, it tells you we have 20 planned and 20 required samples. Now, the information you really need is, and this is one of the things HeadLight is going to work on for us. The information you really need is this custom view, and you have to kind of go in here and select the things you want every time, which is not ideal. We need frequency, not conversion factor. And so we've got some tickets in with HeadLight to get some of this cleaned up to where at least we get a standard what we would normally want and not have to go in every time and do this. But the main 2 that we like to see and what we feel like is very beneficial is this passing and failing sample. Well, created passing and failing. I'm going to unselect that. The notes is where we were talking about earlier that if you type something in, the inspector could see it well. You want to have that on. Some of this other stuff you probably don't need. You probably need a material though. All right, let me close this. That you get a little faster at selecting the things you need once you've done it a couple of times, but it's not the most efficient thing to have to go do that custom view every time you need to look at something. But here you can see it does populate. Remember we did the override for 20 samples on this one. So that does populate here. And as you create samples, they show up here. And then as samples pass, those samples that you create, as they pass or they fail, those show up here. So building out this dashboard and seeing where you're at is really the benefit. And that's kind of one of the things in the past where we probably got behind on some projects and got to the end of them and we failed some of those audits because sometimes it was kind of hard, at least when I was inspecting, it was kind of hard to know, like, did I have enough samples passing, or, if I had some failing samples, did I need to go do something with that? How many was I supposed to have? It was kind of hard to keep up with that. Where now you have this dashboard you can go look at, and I recommend at least every month after the estimate, go look at it because it's going to update your installed quantity, and the dashboard will change according to that installed quantity of how many you're supposed to have, unless you have it overridden like this. And so, looking at that monthly, if you kind of get into a habit of going to check, then usually by the end of the project, you've gotten this. If you run an estimate and you go, oh, we missed 2 samples this month, you still have time to go grab those 2 samples and get 2 passing samples in there to make sure you're on target. And so, but let's go take a look at what this looks like in the dashboard and why this is helpful for inspectors. So the dashboard over here is exactly the same as the dashboard in Sample Plan. So this is materials that you can do on the web or on an iPad app. So the inspectors have access to this. And you can see the thing that changed is now they have a new sample button here. And so what we find also with you building a sample plan in HeadLight is that a lot of the less experienced inspectors do not know these material codes or do not know the material they're supposed to put in a sample ID to sample, a sack of dirt. They know that it's got to go to the lab, but they don't know how to fill out the information because they are not familiar with these material codes. And so having somebody more knowledgeable fill out that sample plan ahead of time takes some of the work away from the inspector. And basically all they do is they go grab the sample and they know they can look at the dashboard or build a custom dashboard and go, okay, I need to sample 3 of these according to the installed quantity. And so all they have to do from here is hit this new sample button and it will create the ID for them. And it's going to fill in some of the information automatically. It's going to start by doing the project. Obviously, it's going to add the material. Let's see, it's about to load up here. So it adds the project. It's going to add the material and the material code. It's going to assign it to the line item. So from this point, there's not much left to do. They can, select a producer, select a destination lab. And this is another thing that HeadLight has got to get fixed for us. Please make sure your people know to unselect that because it does not need to go to all the labs. That causes Kevin Barbier is on this call, and that causes him a lot of headache to have to go cancel all those tests. And it'll have default tests here. If those are correct, they're good. But obviously, you're going to have some that are not right. So this is another thing the inspector kind of has to know. I wish we could get it to a point to where they didn't have to know this either, and it was more automated for them. But that once they select their test and the destination lab and that one other thing, they can hit save and this sample is ready to go to the lab. So I'm not going to save this just because we don't need another sample in the system, but it does save them a few steps and knowing what material they're supposed to be sampling. Dispositions. So let's talk about sample dispositions. So we looked at this sample plan dashboard. There's another one here for samples. There's not going to be any samples in this project, so it's not going to do anything. We talked about how important the custom view is and how you can set that up to see more information. But the last one is failing samples. And I really should pick a project that's got a failing sample in it because it'd be a little better. But when you have a sample fail, so you all know that we have to do some kind of a sample disposition on that sample for the 2059 ATM. In the past, people would just have a Word document or something and, type it all out. It'd be this separate piece of paper. Well, there's actually a place in the software where you can enter dispositions now. And basically what happens is it'll show the sample ID here and what the type and all that stuff is. It'll show that it's failed. And then right here, you're just able to type in a disposition and then it's attached to the ATM 2059. It just shows up. And so sorry, I don't have a failing sample in here to show you, but literally it's just typing the disposition in right there. Like I said earlier, the documents section doesn't do much. It will show the initial sample plans that are created for this project. It looks like I've chosen this project quite a few times. So anyway, that's all of the things through navigation and sample plan. I want to show you one other thing. So one of the issue that we have with sample plan, which is going to take some more fine tuning, is that there's, we do have some things that we sampled that are not necessarily material codes, stuff like temperature on asphalt or cross slope on asphalt or what's some other ones that I'm forgetting there. Um, I don't know. I used to have a list of several of those that we had. Well, there's not necessarily a material code for that. And so people were like, well, what do I put in a sample plan? And then my old office, what they would do, and it works this way, is in the remarks, they would just put, make sure you're grabbing density, make sure you're grabbing, whatever. They would like type out what the inspector would need to do. And so that helped as far as inspector knowing they needed to get samples for each one of those things, but it really didn't give a placeholder in the sample plan for what they needed. So this is really just a workaround, but it's something I want you to know that's there. And it gives you kind of a placeholder to sample from. Is we added a material code, and it starts with eights. So if you just start typing in eights there, we have a generic field sample material. There's also this plans contract specified material that was there prior to us doing this one. You can actually use this one as well, but I've actually gotten our team to put some other requirements in on this one that helps. So let's just choose the generic field sample. And then you can add a testing requirement just like we did before. So let's say we'll add an acceptance test here. You can turn it on and you can put a frequency, override it, show how many samples you want to take, whichever way you want to do that with the calculator, like we talked about earlier. And then in the remarks, you can say what this is, right? So here it's just going to say generic field sample, but let's say this is, what would be, let's say it was for asphalt, then we could just put this as a cross slope. Actually, this is dirt. So let's do this. Let's do density test, right? And so now you have something that you can actually sample from and show that you created a sample from it. Now, in HeadLight materials, this works as well. So now that we have a material there, let's go back over to the dashboard. And I want to show you how this works. 24, 16. But with this material code, we actually you can add the field global test to it so that you get an auto pass. And so you get a passing sample. And so I know I have a density there, and that's something that we don't want to have an auto pass for, but you need a placeholder to be able to put, and density might not be a good example. That might not be something that we use it for. But especially for stuff like temperatures and all, getting an auto pass for it just to show that you did it. And I guess density is fine too. Just make sure that the information is actually in the project and you're not showing that you have a density that's not really there. But it's going to add that generic sample is actually going to tie it to that line item again. And then destination lab, this is where you're going to put your unit lab. So whichever one you are, I'll just pick one of you. And you can add this field global test. And when you save that, you're going to get an auto pass for this sample. So it's going to count in the dashboard. If you needed one sample and this would show a passing sample. So you'd have one of one and you'd be able to have that show up in your 2059. So I'm not going to save that because I'm sure that whoever 268 is doesn't want that in their queue. I'm kind of at the end of my list for the sample plan training stuff. And this works for, it's the reason I'm only showing you like one of these is it works for everything in here. The only thing I will show you that's left is you'll notice, like if I go back and group this together for 203, you can see I have two line items here. So instead of having to go add all of your materials and testing requirements for this one, once you've done one of these, if you have the exact same line item, again, like if it's two different categories, so you got line item 2 and line item 30, and both of them are borrow vehicular measure, you'll get this clone entries button. When you do that, I'm going to undo this so that you can see it here. If you hit this clone and select, so this is the thing that you're copying, and when you select, you want to clone that and paste it over to this one. You hit OK. It's going to give you one other thing saying, hey, we're about to put 2 tests on this new one. And you do that, we're going to give it a second. One thing to notice is this little thing thinking up here in the top right shows that it's not complete yet. A lot of people think that it's done and start clicking around, and I have noticed that this is really something to be mindful of when you're working in here. If you ever see this thing turning over here, don't continue on, wait for it to finish, because I find that it has not, we've had a few people submit tickets where it has not saved their information. And I think that's why. I think they were clicking through while it was still thinking about something else. And then it kind of will lock up the system. And if you're not refreshing and making sure that the stuff is actually saved, I actually had somebody the other day that worked for probably 2 hours on something and it had locked up and didn't save any of their information. So I don't want to scare anybody with that. Just if you see that turning, like stop working on it, let it do what it's going to do. And then every once in a while, especially if you're going to get up and walk away, if you're not using this system like pretty regular and adding stuff to it, like if you are going to take a break and go outside for a minute, whatever, make sure when you come back that you refresh the page, because it will sit there and get into a static state where it's not updating anything anymore. Even though it looks like you're making edits to it, in the background it's not putting anything in the background data tables. So just something to be aware of. If you have a testing requirement, like an acceptance test tied to this, but then you say, oh, you know what, we're not, let's use this generic material. You know what, we're not going to sample this. And you come hit delete right here and you delete this material out. In your sample plan checklist and your dashboard, it's still going to show a sample requirement, even though you delete the material. Now, that's not the way we want it to work. It's kind of a bug in the HeadLight system that they still allow that. Really, what this delete should do is delete the testing requirement and the material, but it only deletes the material. So what he's saying there, what you have to do is you have to go in where you come back to this box where it has a testing requirement, and you have to delete the requirement out, and then you can close this, and then you can delete the material. And when you do that, it'll actually populate to the dashboard and sample plan checklist like it's supposed to. And obviously, I don't think I finished what I was talking about earlier. When you clone, you could see that it was on O2, and then the same thing happened here in the borrow where we clone that over. That does save you some time, but it's not perfect. And what I mean by that is let's look at these stripings right quick. So these 3 striping items would have basically the same exact sampling requirements, but because they're not exactly the same description on the line item, like they're not the exact same line item, and not, I'm not talking about the number, but I'm talking about the actual line item description, it would not clone over to these. In fact, you can see, well, there's nothing in there, but you would not even get a clone button to clone from here to here. And we are looking at, it's another thing that HeadLight's looking at, is kind of how to build a template that you could just load here and like load it to all 3. But like long term, what we're actually wanting to do is take all of this work away from you, or at least 95% of it. So we have all the data that's needed, right? We have line items, we have the quantities, we know what our sample manual says. So what we're really wanting in the future is for this whole thing to just be automated, because we have all the data that's needed. What really should happen is when a project is generated, it should just tell you what you're required to sample instead of you having to go fill this sample plan out. And so we're pushing to move towards that. I've talked to people at HeadLight in the past that say that that's definitely possible and something they can do. Basically, the only thing left is to code in our material sample manual, which is another module, right? Because we would basically need somewhere for our materials lab to go update the manual in HeadLight. And every time they updated the manual in HeadLight, it would still generate the sample plan for your newer projects. And so that's where we want to go with it. We want to take work away from you, not add work to you. I know that sometimes when you're in the field, it doesn't seem that way. It seems like they just keep adding stuff, but we try to do a good job of not adding stuff when we can. And so hopefully we can get to that point to where you don't even have to do this. Now, the way I envision that happening is your project gets, I'm looking into the future when site manager's not there and you get a HeadLight project. When you open up sample plan, it's already generated your sample plan. The PE and the Tech 7 can go in and edit it if you want, because obviously we want you to have control over it. We don't want it to just be generate something for you and that's what you have to use. If you want to sample more for whatever reason, I have a PE that likes to take a cross slope every 100 foot on his project. And so we want him to be able to go in and add the requirement to do that. And so anyway, hopefully that's where we can get to in the future. And, this training will be irrelevant at that point and you'll just be able to get a sample plan and not have to do all this stuff. So, all right, anything else on sample plan? I'm going to go to Fieldbook and do an ATM right quick, and then we can end this thing. Let me choose, I'm going to choose a different project, one that's actually got some data in it. I'll go to a live project. Oh, that's not it. This is actually one that we turned a ATM in on a while back, and it's actually got an approval in it, but I'm still going to go do another one. And so I tend to think that it's better to generate there are several places where you can generate a 2059 ATM in HeadLight. In my opinion, Fieldbook is the best because it's the best place for everybody in the project to view it, including the lab and the PE office. And you're going to do that over here in Forms. So under the Forms tab in HeadLight Fieldbook, you can actually see we have an approved final ATM here. I'm going to create another one because this project actually has passing and failing samples, so you'll actually be able to see it. What you're going to be looking for is LADOTD audit of testing and materials. That's the form name for creating an ATM. If it's your last one, we recommend you change the name to final ATM or something along those lines so that it's easy to find. I'm not going to do that here because they already have a final ATM. We're going to make a test ATM and I'm going to hit create. Now this does take a little while to load, just like the one on Site Manager or even LePave, but it's a little faster. So we'll go to fill out form. And you saw right there, there's a download PDF button. You can obviously just look at this as a PDF and that way you can email it around or whatever. You can print it and turn it in still if you would like, but you don't have to anymore. So the 2059 and the sample plan can both be generated and signed off on in HeadLight, and the audit section will accept that. There's still other things you have to bring up here at headquarters to April in the audit section. And when you do, she might say, "Oh, I don't see your ATM. Is it in HeadLight?" And you just say yes, and she'll go look it up for you right there. You can see we have one failing sample in here. There's some errors and omissions in this. So what happens is they didn't have an approved initial sample plan in here. This is where that would normally show up. So like the document that we went in and created on our other one that I signed, if this was that same project, it would show up here. Not a big deal if you don't have that and you say you did the initial sample plan in a Excel version, but your final sample plan was done in HeadLight. That works too because HeadLight has this button right here that allows you to add files to it. And so if it doesn't show up here, just add it as a file, no big deal. As long as you have all the required documentation of a 2059 added onto this document, you're good to go. And so that's one thing that you get with this is it's a lot more flexible than what we've done in the past because you can just add as much QA documentation to this thing as you want, even if it doesn't show up in the list where it's supposed to. In the project material summary, this is going to tell you for all your line items that you're passing and failing samples. So I'm not going to go through all of these just to show you where that's at. Material summary of failing samples. And so here you can see there was one failing sample right? So this is just, and it gives you a quick look here, but this is basically showing the same thing, that there's a failing sample. Errors and omissions report. This is errors and omissions that were entered into the sample plan software where I showed you earlier. And then dispositions, you can see they entered a disposition. They didn't use this one on the project, and see this passing sample here. So it gives you places for your errors and omissions and disposition right in there. Now let's go back to files. So it sounds like some of you have already done this, and Blaine, it looks like you're already familiar with it. I'm glad to hear that. So kind of what I recommend, let me go back to my desktop because I did put this on here earlier. So what I recommend is to have like folders for your project that have like your CDs and stuff in them. And I feel like this is kind of like building the binder out. Like each tab that you would have in a binder, you build a folder that's got that tab, right, number on it. And then you can just add them here. So let me go back to full screen. When you go to add file, you can just go wherever you have those. I actually have these on the desktop. You can open that up in here. I'm just going to add one of them. One little bug here is you'll see this says file being uploaded. It really only takes a few seconds for that to go, but I've never seen this go away. It just stays there. I would recommend titling this if you're going this route to whatever that folder is, like you could title it 302, add a description here if you would like. And what happens is when you add something to the ATM this way, and I'll go show you, you can see the file was uploaded, and then when you scroll down, you're able to actually see that listed in the files on the ATM. When you go back into the project for journal, let me dismiss this. All right. You can actually see this is what we just uploaded to the ATM. It actually gives you an observation also in Fieldbook so that it's in two places and easy to go view here. So, another way for those auditors, those legislative auditors to go in, they can come look at it here or just go to the form and view that ATM, and it pulls the observation up here so that they can go look through it and make sure that we're doing the QA work. So let's say that you were going to sign this, right? Same thing, you're going to submit. I'm actually not going to do it because this is a live project. Actually, it's over, but it's a real project. So same thing, whoever creates this, in the past, it had to be created from the PE account. HeadLight was able to get a fix in for that. So now a Tech 7 or office manager or whoever normally would like put the 2059 together can put it together and submit it. And once they've submitted it, then the PE, obviously it'll change status down here, kind of like the initial sample plan. It'll be ready for the PE to sign it. And then after the PE signs it, it'll have an approve button that shows up here. Once they hit approve, the DLE will be able to go in, approve it. And then I think the last step for a 2059 is that the area engineer has to sign it. That's all I have. Thanks for everybody joining and listening to that. And like I said, I will get this meeting out to you as soon as I get it uploaded.